In today's world, people feel lost in a sea of ideas. Which ones should we accept? Stay tuned because you're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Here is your host, Kurt Jarris.
And thanks for joining us here on another episode of Veracity Hill, where we are striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. So nice to be with you here this evening for a special episode of Veracity Hill, and we are streaming on Apologetics 315, where you can find daily apologetic resources. And hey, look, we've got a nice promotional shirt here supporting the ministry of Apologetics 315. I want to thank the ministry, of course, for partnering with us this evening, as we are joined by two well-known Christian apologists, and they are here to talk about what it means to equip and empower the next generation of believers. We're joined here by Ted Wright of Epic Archaeology. He's here in studio with us. Ted, great to have you here today.
Be here. Thank you.
Yep. For those who have been following along Veracity Hill, they'll recognize Ted from a few times now that he's been in our office, and it's great to... if you haven't yet, check out some of the great videos that we've got of Ted on his Epic Archaeology ministry. But without further ado, let me join into the program this evening J. Warner Wallace, a cold case detective, and Sean McDowell, a high school teacher and professor at Biola University. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining our program today.
Glad to be here. Yeah.
And so we've got you both in, and we're seeing Sean here. You've got... it's not quite your office. Well, maybe it is your office. I don't know. It looks like the seat of a car.
Well, with three young kids, I kind of feel like I'm a professional Uber driver these days. So I'm just running my kids around. This was not the plan, but sometimes that's what happens when you're a parent. So I'm just thankful for digital technology that we can still do this.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much. And of course, being a good parent is a part of what you guys write about here in your new recent book, So the Next Generation Will Know. And you have written this not really to, for a lot of people, apologetics is about the arguments and, what's the evidence for the existence of God and answering people's questions. But this book isn't quite about that, is it?
No, it's not a what book. It's not a what is book. We've written those kinds of books, and we love doing that. And a lot of what we do in churches and in conferences is about describing why Christianity is true, why the Christian worldview makes sense of reality, why it is the only consistent worldview. All that stuff we talk about in other books. But at the end of the day, people still come up to us and say, okay, I get it. I need to kind of catch up in some of these areas, and I'm going to do that. I've started reading. I've started researching. I'm becoming a better, I think, more knowledgeable Christian, which is good. But still, the problem is, even having done all that, how do I teach this? How do I transfer this, especially given whatever your setting might be? As a parent, how do I initiate those kinds of conversations? What do I do? What does it look? What does it sound like? Be very practical. So even though you might have all this head knowledge about what is true, still there's the challenge of trying to teach it. And so what this book is I hope, is uniquely, it's a how-to book. It's that once you know something, you still need some help figuring out how to transfer it to the next generation.
And you won't find, if I can add, the word apologetics a ton in the book. We're actually trying to reach outside of our normal audience to people who might not be interested in apologetics or maybe even know what it is, but they care about truth to the next generation. They care about the challenges these kids are facing. So if you look in the book, we actually arranged each chapter like love trains, love relates, love equips. This is a relational approach where you could say we're weaving in apologetics through the back door, through this care that parents, teachers, and pastors have about raising up this generation, helping them thrive in their faith amidst what really seems like an increasingly secular culture.
To that, Sean, the Barna Group, or maybe they just call them Barna now, back in 2018, came out with a study, and here it's the headline: Atheism doubles among Generation Z. So why do you think it is that there's an increase here in atheism, or even just people who identify as non-religious, part of the younger generation, Generation Z?
Well, even in it doubling, it's still a minority amongst this generation. So when you go from 2% to 4% or 4 to 8, whatever the numbers are, that doubling is significant because we're noticing a trend. But atheism is still a minority amongst all generations today. And that's important to keep in mind. But what we are seeing, I think we're really seeing come to fruit, this digital generation that has more challenges just one click away than any generation has ever faced. So I've talked to my dad a ton about when he was doing apologetics and parenting in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and how these questions have changed and they've got earlier. And they're ubiquitous now. So when this generation is faced with so many questions and so many worldviews, and as a church, we just have not been doing as good of a job as we can to show that Christianity is true, we would expect to see a little bit of a rise in atheism. I think the other perspective is that you just have this rise of the nones, Nones, is that people are resisting labels like they did in the past. They're resisting labels. But a lot of this move towards the nuns are not all atheists. Some of them pray, some of them believe the Bible, but some of that smaller group just don't want to be called Christians anymore because Christianity isn't as popularly accepted as it was in generations in the past.
Yeah, it's so true. If you think about this idea that things double, I don't want to be sensationalist about this, and neither does Sean. One thing we said early on is it'd be easy for us to talk about, well, what percentage is leaving the church and be alarmist about it. But there's no point in doing that. Yeah, it's true. You can say you have the fastest growing podcast. If last week you had 2 listeners and this week you have 4, well, you've doubled your podcast. You can do that for many weeks until finally there's a statistical amount of people. Now it's harder to double. So what you're seeing is a very small percentage. And the people who identify as nuns possess spiritual ideas about a higher being. So if you look at the numbers and drill down, nuns are not atheists. As a matter of fact, atheism is really not growing at a pace that I think it's within the range of error in most polls. What we do see is that people are not identifying necessarily as Christian, but they still hold Christian worldview ideas about which is good for us, right? Because we know that they're still reachable. Yeah. But think about this for a second. I mean, in the past, all trust, informational trust, is really grounded in authority, right? So you think, okay, well, if your dad is a professor in cosmology, you've got a relationship with your dad and he has this expertise, you're probably going to adopt and trust his views about cosmology. Now what you have is really what appears to be kind of equal authority all over the internet. I'm not sure who to trust on this. I mean, is it the guy who's got the best website? Some of the smartest people I know have terrible looking websites. That's not their thing, right? and some of the people I know who aren't very authoritative have great looking websites. So I think it's confusing for young people to know, again, how do I ground my informational trust if I'm not sure who is an authority?
It seems like for older folks, they might be wondering, or maybe they're asking, hey, what book can I get for my kid? Because they want to be seen as an authority, or maybe they've even realized they are now failing as an authority, so they need to get their kid more resources. Is that the type of question they should be asking?
I don't think so. Go ahead, Sean.
I don't think so either. No single book can fix a kid in the vast majority of circumstances. Jim and I all the time have people come up and say, my kids question the faith, my kids left their faith, what book can fix this? And I'll always sign and give them a book, but I'll also try to encourage them to build their relationship with their kid, to have a long-term view. So it is a question about authority. But studies actually consistently show, and they have since, when I was growing up as a Gen Xer, people talked about this, millennials and today, that the primary influence in the life of a young person is their parents. Yeah. It's more than teachers. It's more than youth pastors. It's more than Hollywood. But we don't do the effective strategies that we talk about in this book. So we kind of hand over that authority to our culture. That's the problem. So our heart is just to say, look, you already have huge authority with your kids. Here's some things you can learn. Here's some practical things you can tweak and maximize this relationship that God has built in for you to have with your kids.
Now, this is a very important issue because this is that connection between relationship and truth that people take for granted. Whenever, and this happens a lot, people will say, can I buy your book? Could you sign this book to my son who needs to hear this? What, really? Okay, I'm not signing this book to you. I'll sign it to your son. But this book's for you because you have that relationship already. Now, sadly, I think sometimes when a parent comes up and asks this question, what they're really kind of saying is that I have a broken relationship. And this is at the root of what the issues are. And that's where your heart's broken for people, right? Because it's not a matter of information for these guys. A lot of times it's that they have a broken relationship. Now, what I've noticed is I have a relationship with my dad, but he's not a believer. And I have shared truth with him. But in that season, truth and relationship, in that season, when you're not able to communicate truth because they're not listening, they're chasing their own stuff, they're in rebellion, whatever it may be. Well, I can say no more about the truth side of this equation, but I can build on the relationship side of the equation with my dad. So I've just decided for that season that there's no point in trying, and as a parent, the same is true. So what we want to try to do in the book is talk about, well, do you really love your kids? Of course you do. Also, do you have a better chance probably of having the deep relationships when your kids are younger? I mean, by the time they're in college and they're out from I have kids, I have adult kids, I have a relationship with them, but it's not the same as I had with my 30-year-old when he was 12. I had a different kind of relationship with him then. So I think this work needs to happen very early because it's in the earlier ages and I don't think for a second that your kids, if you're a Christian educator, if you are a junior high youth pastor, you think, well, that's going to happen in high school? No. That has to happen now. That probably has to happen in upper elementary. That has to happen, that the kind of work we do in helping our students to know why Christianity is true has to happen a lot earlier than ever before, because here's what happens. We think they're not capable of us giving them this deep information about the truth of Christianity, but we do think they're capable of us giving them this. Really? So you're going to give them this, but you're not going to give them where's that going to lead? This is the reason why you need to start earlier with the truth of Christianity, because this is a source of all kinds of mistrust and questioning and every worldview on the same parallel level. I mean, if we're willing I almost think if you're going to time yourself as to when you're giving your kids one of these, you need to go back 2 years prior and start really making sure, because you have to inoculate before you give them a phone. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do in this book is show you, well, what would you do? What does a conversation look like? And again, I want reasonable expectations. So we have thick books that we've written. Evidence that demands a verdict is about this thick. Okay? I mean, my books, they're super thick. If you look at cold case Christian. Okay, this is not what we're trying to do here. This is a big book, and it's got a lot of pages. What this is,
it's got a lot of pictures in it too, Jim.
It does too. It does, yes. But we wanted a book that was thinner and more accessible, because we know you might know all this stuff, but still have a hard time initiating a conversation in whatever your context is. Have a hard time making sure that you ingrain these ideas. This book is designed to be brief, because I want you to go cover to cover. And you might look at this and there's like 1,000 things to do in here. Really? Well, you're like, I'm overwhelmed. Just do one. And we wanted to give you a quick resource that would get you started with just the one. Sometimes you can read a book and a great idea comes out and that one idea sticks in your head. Here, what we hope is a great practice pops out. That's the one practice you employ with your kids. And that's what we're hoping for.
Jim, I'm glad you brought up the smartphone. I was going to ask if there is this break of authority between a parent and a child, that there's just something missing. It seems like the smartphone has sort of filled in, or the internet has filled in. So what are the ways, I guess open to either of you guys, what are the ways that modern media has sort of taken in and swooped in to form the worldview of young people?
Well, here's one way to think about it. The way we frame it in the book is probably more than anything what a smartphone does is it has information overload for this generation. So the amount of messages they hear and see, whether in advertising that's explicit or more subtle ones on social media or videos, they're constantly bombarded with endless information. So a way to think about it is when I was a kid, I remember these commercials that was Coke versus Pepsi. And kind of the idea was Pepsi, because they made the commercials, was always people were surprised, wow, Pepsi's better. Yeah. But the idea, if you think about the reasoning behind it, is if you want a soda, there's really two options. You could get a root beer, you could go get a Dr. Pepper, but really there's two options. Well, today you buy your own soda making machine and you make the amount of fizz, the size you want, and the flavor tailored just uniquely for you. You know, in Starbucks, there's 87,000 different drink options.
Is that right?
Think about buying, 87,000. Google it. It must be right. That's what Google said. It has to be true, right? Well, look, I remember when I was a kid, it was go to the Starbucks calendar, Starbucks, Roebuck and Sears.
Yeah,
calendar.
Sears and Roebuck.
There was 2 toys, and they took 6 weeks to come. Now kids get every conceivable option you can think of brought to you the next day on a drone if you want it, really. Now, think about music. We used to have tapes or CDs. Now you have the song you want anywhere you want. So what that does is it teaches a kid, whether they realize it or not, that they can conform the world to their tastes rather than have to conform themselves to an external truth. That's what the cell phone does. So we came to believe, and we framed this book, that if there's endless voices and endless information speaking into young people, how do we gain their attention? And I think it's really 2 things. Number 1 is relationship. Why should a young person listen to us? It's because there's a relationship. And us, I mean all of us listening, that we build into their life. I actually think trust is one of the most important commodities today. So Jim mentioned the book Evidence Demands a Verdict. And when my dad first wrote that, what made that valuable is nobody had that information. But now people have that information. So why do an update? Well, number 1, it saves time. But number 2, because my father's been in ministry so long, his name or his brand, for lack of a better term, people say, oh, I can trust him, so I'll listen to him. That's because a relationship is built there. So trust with our kids, trust with young people gives us the right to speak into their lives. Second, it's a worldview. If there's endless information coming to this generation, what we have to do is have a funnel by which they can say, this is important, this is good, this is true, this is false. So like Jim said earlier, truth and relationships. So we frame the entire book, given that technology, in particular digital technology, shapes this generation more than any generation. They're digital natives, by saying, how do we build relationships with them to have the trust to speak into their lives? And then how do we help form their worldviews to think Christianly? That's the way that we framed it in light of the digital challenges and really a smartphone generation.
Now, think about what he just said about the number of options. So I noticed a second ago, he's in his car modeling what we ought to be doing, right? As parents who put this priority, right? I, on the other hand, have grown kids, so I don't even care what they're doing today, okay? But Sean has to be, he's still doing that, so it's good. But I noticed, I think you drank a Monster. Did I see you drink a Monster, dude? Are you drinking a white?
No,
what are you drinking?
I do not. I don't drink Monsters like you. It's just one of these sparkling beverages. That's it, man.
Okay,
I'm healthier than your Monster nonsense.
I know, right? So I noticed, though, what I noticed is that everyone has been influenced by the number of choices that are possible. So that company that's making that drink, maybe in the past, in my generation, for sure, for boomers, they make one drink. But
That's
now
right.
Coca-Cola has got every type of flavor along with it. And as, of course, you said, even when you go into restaurants, what's the most popular soda dispenser that's available? It's the one where you can walk in and pick any, you push the buttons and it picks any certain variety. You've got 15 kinds of just Diet Coke, then Coke Zero. Then you've got, you can put the lemon, the lime, all that. This is where we're at right now. And what it means is exactly what Sean said, is that we have now the ability to form our own realities based on our tastes and preferences. And not only is it happening in terms of our consumerism, but it's happening in terms of our media consumption. For example,
That's right.
as an adult, I guarantee you, if I know something about whoever I'm talking to politically, I know which news sources they are resisting altogether and not even paying attention to, and which news sources they favor. They have been able to isolate themselves in their own micro-narrative. You can watch whatever shows you want to watch that reflect whatever worldview you hold, because there are thousands of choices. Do you remember it used to be, if someone said, I'm going to get a TV show, that used to mean something. it doesn't mean anything anymore. Because in the
right.
past, you had a 1 in 3 chance of being seen because there were only 3 networks. Now, you could have a TV show. It could be great. No one's seeing it because there's a billion choices. Here's what it means. It means that if we possess what we believe is a true meta-narrative, we're going to have to overcome the construction of micro-narratives in the lives of our kids. And and I think it is going to be harder to communicate and to convince a culture that there is a single meta-narrative that we would have to bend our knee to in a world in which that's not the case for anything anymore. I don't think that any young person believes that they ever have to do that. And that's where I think it becomes more difficult, right? And so what we're trying to do is to look at the 3 groups that I think have to do it with young people. Because my fear was, and when Sean first came to me with the idea for the book, we talked about this because we want to train up youth pastors at Talbot, at Biola, in the Apologetics program, right? We know this group needs to reach young people. But there's a lot of other people in the church who have contact with young people. And I will tell you, at book tables, after we do events, that is the consistent narrative that's heartbreaking. It's that everyone's got some young person they're concerned about. So as a church, we are raising kids. And that means that even folks who might say, well, my kids are grown. Oh, yeah, my kids are. Okay, they are. But I'm in a church body. And in that church body, there are young people. And we're in the Big C church across the globe. And that Big C church has got young people in it. And if you care about the future impact that Christianity will have on the next generation, and you ought to, then we're going to have to get involved in this game. We used to think, well, we can let that's what youth pastors do. That's what teachers do in high school and junior high. Well, no, actually, that's going to have to become all of our responsibility. And so that's why we said, hey, if you love young people. Now, what happens is you get older, because I'm about 15 or I'm not maybe more than that, older than Sean. So what happens is you kind of
30
get set,
years.
right? Yeah, 30 years. So the point is, but what happens is if you're not careful, you're kind of like, hey, get off my lawn kind of a guy, right? Everything's irritating you, right? I got no patience for this. I want to retreat back into a world in which there are no young people irritating me. Well, I think that as Christians, we ought to be the one unique group that understands that the love of our neighbor begins with the love of our young neighbor. And I think it's important for us to get involved in this work.
Yeah. Ted, you had a question you wanted to ask.
So, Sean, you're a dad / Uber driver. Some of the principles in this book, and you still have kids in the house, are some of the things that you put in the book things that you and your wife have done at your own house?
Yes, they are. In fact, I would say really the source are a few things. Number one, I just read endlessly, studies, books, and I'm always looking for ideas that I can borrow from somebody else. If it works, do it. Don't reinvent the wheel. Second, a lot of things my parents did with me. Most things I think they did well. There's a few things I left out and I do differently. That's what it means to become a parent, to personalize it. But there's a lot of things that my parents did that I learned from. And then third are things that my wife and I just do with our kids that we work into it. And you'll notice sometimes, like, we tell stories when things don't work for us. Jim and I share a lot of our failures and a lot of our positives. So I had this great summer idea where we're going to watch movies with our kids and talk about the worldview. And I was going to teach them some things. And we had some pretty good conversations. But one epic failure my kids still give me a hard time on is we watched the movie The Apostle with Robert Duvall. And I was like, oh, they're going to love it. This is about faith. I mean, my kids hated it. They felt tortured. Still to this day, they're like, hey, Dad, you want to watch The Apostle? I'm like, be quiet. Stop it. But, you learn by trial and error. And some things work and some things don't. So at the heart of this book, really, Ted, partly what motivated me at this stage is I want to get this right. And I want to spend some time researching this, thinking about this, brainstorming with Jim, thinking through what my parents did, look at things that worked for me, look for things that didn't, and just kind of give the readers a glimpse into my life, things that have worked well and things that haven't worked well, and share those stories along the way. So, yes, a lot of it comes from our own experience and some of the things we do with our own kids.
Awesome.
But there are a bunch of train wrecks in here. And I think, I didn't become a Christian until my kids I already had kids. And they were, in elementary school. But I mean, I didn't know, when you become a Christian and you're pretty early on in your walk, you might spend 5 years before you even it dawns on you that this is your responsibility to do over in these categories, or you know enough to be able to do it effectively. Or in other words, I wasn't raised in a Christian family, and I was raised in a broken home. I have one parent. So I didn't want to have kids originally because I didn't think I would know what to do with them, because I was an only child of a broken marriage. So a lot of this for me was like having to learn kind of the hard way, right? But I did love my family. I love my wife, and I wanted to do anything to be a better parent alongside of her. So what I would say to people, I think it's intimidating sometimes because, and I was reluctant to write a book that might position me as some kind of parent that I am not. I'm like everybody else. I have the same failures and the same struggles that everybody else has. Now, I did spend enough years in youth pastoring, and luckily, so interestingly, they put me in a position of authority as a youth pastor, and I was in seminary at the time I was raising my kids. So a lot of what raising kids was to me was what I also did in youth ministry, and that's where I think Sean and I can help a little bit, because all the failures you have in a classroom trying to teach high schoolers, all the failures you have in a youth pastorate watching your kids in the first year, train wreck their faith. These kinds of things you learn from, and it presented us with a sense of urgency. We needed to fix that. So we fixed it, and now as we fixed it, that's what we're going to share with you. But here's what I don't want. I don't want people to be so intimidated to think that, I can't do super parent. Trust me, I can't do super parent either. So this isn't a book about super parenting or about super teaching or super pastoring. I think it's pretty honest just about what it is, and we're going to give you what worked for us. And that's, what's great about it is, as your kids get older, you kind of know what you have. My kids are grown now. And Sean's kids are still young. You hope that they're going to be a certain thing, right, when your kids are young. And we all parent kids who fall somewhere in a spectrum of either belief, faith, or commitment to that belief and faith, right? Because if you've got 3 kids, you know that one's going to be more or less committed than the other. I mean, it's just the way it is, right? So I think what we try to do in this book is that, knowing all that's true, what we're trying to do is just to show you, hey, you don't have to be super parent to adopt 1 or 2 simple principles in this book that'll help you take an extra step.
Good. Gentlemen, we've got to take a short break here. When we come back, though, I want to ask what the difference is between teaching and training. So we'll get into that after a break here. Just a 2-minute break, and something new for those that are following along. By the way, we're joined today by Sean McDowell and J. Warner Wallace, co-authors of the recent book, So the Next Generation Will Know. Something new for our show, we're starting to do a video break. So this will be new. Instead of a still image, those who are following us here on our live stream will get a taste of something a little bit better today and onward as well. So stick with us through this short break from our sponsors.
You're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
Evangelical Christians are talking about hell. What if we believe what we believe because we've always believed it? What if the gospel is really a matter of life and death? We want you to open your mind, open your Bible, and rethink hell. At rethinkinghell.com, evangelicals look at what the Bible says about hell, putting conventional and controversial views to the test.
Let's say there's this Christian apologist. You love their message, but have trouble finding their videos, their articles, or social media posts. How do you stay connected to them? We're on it. Defenders Media uses the tools of the digital age to create content for your favorite apologists. We give them more screen time, more digital soapboxes, and more presence to deliver more of the content that you love. That's what we do.
I know that social media is important to those of you who follow my work. Many respond to my videos and posts on Facebook and Twitter, but it becomes impossible after a while to keep up with it all and to continue with research. That's why I'm thrilled that we have found a solution, Defenders Media.
Whether it's a website, whether it's printed material, whether it's a question on graphics, I cannot do what I do and reach my audience without the help of Defenders Media. They have been integral in helping me to reach my audience.
Defenders Media ensures consistent content reaches your hand from today's leading apologists and apologetic ministries, like Mike Licona, Apologetics 315, the Veracity Hill podcast with Kurt Jarris, and more.
To learn more, text the word Defenders to 555-888, and we'll send you a free PDF of the top 5 ways to share the gospel online. Thanks for sticking with us through that short break from our sponsors. If you'd like to learn how you can become a sponsor or a patron, you can visit our website, veracityhill.com, and click on that patron tab. We're joined this evening by Dr. Sean McDowell and J. Warner Wallace. Jim, you don't have a PhD yet, do you?
Dude, if you're going to call him a doctor, you're going to have to call me detective. I don't have a DOCT,
Detective, yes.
I have a DET, okay? So that's what all that matters, all right? Detective Wallace from now on for you, okay? That's all you can do. Don't even call me Jim. Just Detective Wallace from now on.
Detective Wallace, my apologies there.
Okay, cool.
Say, I know you guys have been on the program before and have participated in rapid questions. But I did want to ask you guys a couple questions about how you guys know each other. You know, your relationship goes back for many years. So how'd you guys meet?
Well, actually, I owe Sean a lot because I met him at a conference in a local city here where we were just speaking at the same time, and I had probably my first year or second year of speaking, and I think Sean had just written maybe Ethics. Maybe you had just finished that book. I know that was one of the books you brought. And we connected, and ultimately my daughter we started doing these trips to Berkeley. We talk about it in the book a little bit. And my daughter ended up going on one of those trips because I was along for training. And my daughter was an 8th grader, and she ended up becoming a part of Sean's class after that. But on those trips to Berkeley, I would just teach on the reliability of Scripture. And on one of those trips, Sean said, you should write a book about this. And that's actually why I wrote Cold Case. So it was after that trip to Berkeley with Sean. So, yeah, we go back probably 8 years. I'm not sure how many years now.
You know who first introduced us was Brett Kunkel. You knew him maybe a year or a few months before. And he goes, hey, this guy's a detective. He's retiring. He's looking at his next stage. Will you get on the phone and talk? I didn't have a clue who you were. I'm just like, man, this guy talks fast. He's got a ton of questions, and he's a go-getter. Sounds cool. We talked for half an hour. You were thinking about teaching high school, like you just weren't sure where you were headed.
That's right.
And then very shortly after that, we did the trips and just kind of hit it off from there.
Yeah, so it's been a great partnership.
All right, let me ask you guys another personal question. Do you know each other's favorite beverage?
Well, I know that Sean will know what my favorite beverages are because I'm always drinking in front of him. I'm not sure.
That's gin and just kidding.
Yeah. Just go ahead and tell everybody I'm drinking gin now. Yeah, so I don't think I know Sean's...
A Monster drink is your favorite, right?
That's right. Hey, but you know what's interesting about this is that this is what we always hate, right? I remember we did a conference together, and they bring us on the stage to play games before we would talk. I will never forget. This has happened to me with the same conference where they'll ask me questions about people I should know what they like on these certain categories. And I remember at one time Sean was on the stage doing this too. There's nothing worse than, because a lot of these things are niche-y, right? You don't always know what your friends like in certain categories.
Yeah.
So and you feel like an idiot then, especially if they don't give you any warning and they do it in front of 3,000 kids. It's like, really? Oh, thanks. Appreciate that. Feel like an idiot. So
in other words, he doesn't know and he wants you to feel bad for asking him.
Yes, that's exactly right. Well, you should feel bad because I don't think you called me detective in that last question anyway.
I'm not sure I had addressed you detective. Okay. All right. So we're talking about your book, which is hasn't yet been released, but for those that are interested, you can. We've got a link here in the live stream. Where you can pre-order. And Jim, you've been so kind. You're giving away some of your own free copies of Cold Case Christianity for those that pre-ordered the book.
Well, what's interesting is we both wanted to do that, but I've been publishing with Cook for a number of years, so I'm able to ask Cook, hey, since you have rights on both books, can you do this or that for us? This, I think, is the maybe first or second book with Cook. Maybe it's the first book for you, Sean, with Cook, right? Because you've published 1,000 other places. So you can't ask a different publishing company to do you a favor on this, right?
Yeah,
So what we tried to do is he's included, and I always liked this, he's got a PowerPoint in part of the pre-order package that will really help you communicate the nature of Gen Z to other people. So I think between the PowerPoints we're offering, the videos we're offering on the pre-order, and both of us have got a page for that on our website. so you can actually find that pre-order. But really, what's you're holding the ARC, right? So I have the ARC also. That's usually the advanced reader copy. It's a slightly different. It's not entirely edited the way it'll be. But what I also noticed, and we noticed this, is that it doesn't say anywhere on there that the forward is written by Nick Foles, the MVP quarterback of when he won the MVP, he was with the Philadelphia Eagles.
Right.
So what we've really tried to do is to look at the categories of people who would be interested in raising up the next generation. Now, Nick's a guy who, even as he's been playing in the NFL, has been attending seminary to become a youth pastor.
A youth pastor, right.
Yeah, so we knew that he had this passion and heart for youth. But, George Foreman is another guy who's an endorser on the book. Brett Hundley now he's with the Arizona Cardinals, is another endorser on the book. Just kind of well-known parents that are out there.
Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Yes, even Melissa Joan Hart. But she's very interesting. She has, in the last 3 or 4 years, become very public about her faith, and as a result, she's become the target, I think, of a lot of people who would kind of bash her about her faith. So what I love about people like that is that they have this other platform, which you could risk, but they're willing to risk that platform to do something special. And so we think we've identified people in the broad categories that we're trying to reach with a book like this. And again, we don't think it has to be somebody who's mastered the evidence in order to start having conversations with your kids.
But I think what's interesting about this, if I can jump in, is, Jim, you get all the credit first for getting Nick Foles to do the foreword. Props to you on that one. But second, we got Albert Mohler did an endorsement for us, recognizable pastor, clearly reformed, as well as Mark Ostreicher, who would describe himself as being more on the left politically, was the head of youth specialties for a while, a little bit more progressive than both of us. They both agreed to it because they said, pass it on the faith, broadly speaking, the strategies to do this. This is a unique book we're in. So that was pretty neat to get such a range of people to see the value in it.
No, that's absolutely true. I can't even imagine seeing people who have that kind of ideological difference, maybe theologically even,
endorsing the same book.
Right.
Seriously.
The idea here is that this is a book which is, these kinds of books, evidence that demands a verdict. Those are the kinds of books that give you content. What is it I would be communicating to my young people? But this is the kind of book that says, well, yeah, then how do I do that? And because we stayed in the how as a how-to book, I think this has broader application for people. And I think because it's so brief, for a lot of years at my publishing house, at Cook, I thought, man, why are we writing these books that are like, 50,000 words, right? I mean, does anyone, I really do wonder, Lifeway just closed all of its brick and mortar stores. The number of people you poll now who are still reading steadily decreases based on generation. The number of words they're willing to read is steadily decreasing by generation. And I just felt like, hey, although the parents of these folks are probably going to be Gen X, I don't know. I wanted a resource that was going to read fast. Now, what that means is it ends up being packed, right? It's dense. I think it's pretty dense with ideas, content, right? I don't think we did any less content than a book of this size, okay? But we also knew that we're speaking, this is part of what we're trying to learn, right? If you're saying that this generation is a digital generation that has a smaller attention span, we have to model it. We have to start to kind of speak in a format that I think captures the ethos of the generation we're writing to. So I was just happy that we were able to do it briefly and could do it in a way that's broadly appealing, I hope.
So I want to, with the time that's left for us, we've got about 15 minutes here left. I want to talk about some of the things you write about in the book there. You talk about the difference between teaching and training the next generation. Maybe you guys can help us understand what's the difference there.
Well, Sean has done this. We took these trips to Berkeley for years, and we learned this together with Brett Kunkel. We kind of grew up in the same ideas and trying to make those work. And Brett has taken the kind of the masthead on this idea of can we have immersive experiences that turn teaching into training? And so the quickest way to say it is that teaching is just imparting information. So we can teach in this video. But training is preparing for a challenge. So boxers train preparing for a fight. Paramedics train preparing to be deployed. So does military. military, so do police officers. We train because we know there's something that's going to test the training, and it's coming. We know it's coming. It's not a matter of if I'm going to have to pull my gun out and shoot it. It's a matter of when and how I'm going to do it. So I have to train to get ready to do that. What we discovered is if we will simply just set on the calendar the challenge for young people, and it can be very modest. We've given a whole chapter with very brief ideas about how you can set reachable challenges for your kids. But what that does is that then if I'm a youth pastor, for example, and I've got a trip coming up to Berkeley, oh, trust me, we're going to spend 8 sessions. Might take 4 weeks, might take 8, depending on how often we meet. But we're going to spend 8 sessions that everyone's going to have to attend if they want to go on that trip, because those are trainings. Because we know that in the end, you're going to be in the ring on the campus of UC Berkeley or wherever it is. So what we've tried to do is think outside the box a little bit, because I get it. I can't see how parents are going to, I can't take an 8-day trip to Berkeley. I get it. If you're a youth pastor or a Christian educator, I think you could actually start to angle in that direction. But I get it. You may not be able to do that as a parent. So we've given you alternatives that I think will be challenging enough that then for the weeks leading up to this thing you're about to do, it'll begin to structure your conversations, because you know you're getting ready for that event. Look, I think that when I first started to read what Sean was writing about, that he's doing in the context of his family, growing up in his family, right, with his dad, I am always both envious and regretful. Envious in the sense that I wish I had that experience. You learn from your parents. If your parents don't know much or don't even try in this category, I didn't learn much. I'm also regretful that I didn't become a Christian a lot earlier, and maybe started earlier with my own kids. So what we're trying to do here is to make you sensitive to the approach. And then what you're going to start to notice is that, oh, there's an opportunity right there. I never would have seen that opportunity before, but now I've read this book, and now I see the opportunity when it swings by. And now I'm in the car and the radio's playing, and maybe that would have just gone right by. I would never even seen that as an opportunity for a conversation. But now, because I've become sensitive, I remember when I was not a Christian, things would happen. I would just write it off to accident and coincidence. And then suddenly I realized, well, there's more at work here in the universe. And I became sensitive to the working of God, even in my own life. Things didn't pass by me as quickly anymore. I caught them. That's what we're trying to do with a book like this. Just make you so hypersensitive to the opportunities that you won't have to be that intentional. It's just going to pop up. You're going to go, oh, yeah, that's like he talked about in the book. And off you go. So that's the hope here with a book like this.
Sean, what are some of the other strategic opportunities you guys write about? What are some of the suggestions, the principles that you guys advertise here?
Sure. The way Jim framed it, I think, is exactly right. That we're not proposing some new program where you overhaul everything and start over. None of us have time for that. But we're saying let's be sensitive and have our ears perked for the opportunities that arise. So not long ago, my son came to me. He goes, "Hey, Dad, some kids are talking about this movie Bohemian Rhapsody. Do you mind if I go see it?" And I said, well, let me look into this a little bit. It's a story about Queen, and it has some sexuality in it. My son is 14. So I said, well, let's look this up together and read about it. Read about it, and it clearly had some ideas contrary to those I want to impart to my kid, but it didn't feel like it was over the top. It was PG-13. So I said, tell you what, here's the deal. Take it or leave it. I'll take you, and a good friend of yours will go see it. If you just promise we'll come back, and for 20 minutes, we'll just sit down and talk about it. I don't want to lecture you, but I just want to talk about it with you. What did you see? What are things we can learn from it? What do you notice where maybe they had some ideas they're trying to impart on you? And my son goes, sure. So we bring a friend of his. We go to the movie. It was an enjoyable movie. Clearly had some agenda embedded in there, but it was an interesting, well-done movie. I enjoyed it. We came back, and we just sat down. 20 or 30 minutes, we talked about it and moved on. Well, that was an opportunity. Some parents would just say, what? See this movie? I don't want to support it. Not give my money. That's bad, and write it off. Well, and others would just say, sure, go see it, and never talk about it with them. I am looking for these opportunities all the time. So another example, whenever a story hits in the media, I'll write it down, and I'll just at the dinner table talk to my kids about it. So somewhat recent story with this whole Jussie Smollett saga that happened. where, I mean, this bizarre story in Chicago. And, you know, like,
we're here
because yeah, there you go. Because it's such a bizarre story, I knew my kids would kind of be interested in it. And I said, hey, it sure seems like this guy staged an attack. He's black and he's gay. Why would he stage an attack? What was he thinking? It, like, my kids aren't even clueless to it, but I just started thinking about, hey, in our culture, we have raised up victims. Victimhood is kind of the new hero in our culture. And they didn't, you know, sometimes these conversations don't work. One time I was talking to my son like 2 years ago, we were done, and I kid you not, Kurt, he goes, hey, good speech, Dad. And I just thought, oh my gosh. But you know what? I'm not going to quit. I'm going to keep going. We spend much more time talking about Infinity War and superheroes
and
Endgame
in 2 weeks.
Endgame, we already have our ticket, you know, like we're set for that. So most of the time is that stuff. But one of the strategies we talk about is being intentional and looking for those opportunities and creating those opportunities. It's not a lot of work. It's just a refocusing, and it's not lecturing our kids. It's engaging them in conversation relationally.
And
yeah, that is such a good point. I mean, think about this whole idea. Sean has developed a relationship with his kids through superheroes. And what better? I mean, I think sports also do this. They're like living parables, right? Sports, in which if I had to tell a parable about the sower, I could tell it based on an NBA game or based on something happening in college basketball, because these are living parables that are occurring right before our eyes. We have a choice whether we tell them as parables or just let them slip by. And almost every superhero movie capitalizes on this embedded narrative that is in our DNA, the savior narrative. It's in our DNA because God put it there. And so it comes out best, right, in these kinds. I mean, I remember I had these conversations about my son. Why is he a cop? He's a cop because he has the embedded superhero narrative, the savior narrative. He wants to live it. And so that's why I know what he puts on that uniform every day. He's becoming Superman that day. I know it because we've had these conversations. So I think, and I got a doctor does the same thing. That David does the same thing, puts on the white coat. He's living out the savior narrative that we could be talking about in all of these, but it's about opportunities. Could you imagine having Sean as your dad? Okay, I mean, most of what my kids caught was that they were present. This is another strategy as well. They're just present when you're. I kind of feel like it's the overflow of who you are that your kids catch, right? Out of the overflow of the mouth, the heart, the mouth speaks. So I caught things from my dad because he was simply excited about those things. And they became a part of our conversations because he was simply excited. It's not like my dad was thinking about football in a way that he thought, I've got to pass this excitement on about football to my kids. No, he was just excited about football. So before I know it, I'm refereeing football in college. We're refereeing high school games together. Why am I doing that? Well, I caught that enthusiasm from him. So a lot of what we're going to have to do, I think, as parents is just to reprioritize our lives and become enthusiastic about the things that then hopefully will overflow to our kids. Because I'll tell you what, if you're enthusiastic about Christian worldview and why this is true, you're going to end up having those conversations with your kids that Sean is talking about. One last thing before I just come off this. I have disappointments about things I couldn't have done or should have done in my job. Cases I couldn't solve. I've got a couple open cases still that bug me. And I'm disappointed about those. And so we can have professional disappointments. But when it comes to family, we are
Well, it seems Jim has frozen out there at a very important point.
Oh no! Am I back now with you guys? I saw you.
You're back.
We're back now.
Like
you had
yeah, sorry.
You had the dad.
I was just waiting for that internet to catch up.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think disappointment you can live with. It's much harder to live with regret, right? So what we wanted to do here is I do have regrets. You probably have them too if you think about it. Things you wish you could have done better in your marriage, could have done better as a parent, could have done better, whatever. Well, what we're trying to do is just to say, I just don't want to have any regrets about the spiritual life that I paved for my kids. I don't want to be the guy that they say, hey, you know, I'm not a Christian because of that guy. I didn't want to be that guy, right? I wanted to be able to do something. So it's going to be a bit cathartic to be able to write the things that I hope somebody else it'll prevent them from having a regret in the same area, right? So that's what we're really trying to do here. Is if anything will produce regrets, it's what you wish you could have done with your own kids. So that's why it's an important responsibility for us to write the book.
Jim, thank you for sharing that. Certainly true, and you guys write about that. There has to be a willingness to sacrifice some of your own priorities in your life if you want to invest in your children, because we realize that is the priority. That's better, involving yourself with your kids' lives is so much better than just sitting on the couch watching a Netflix show, Right. Get involved with your kids and the lives that they're flourishing in, and you want them to continue to flourish and participate in that. So I'm a parent of 3 daughters, so young still, but even before we started doing this video, I was home and I was reading a book with them. So the small things like that add up, and those are the things that kids remember. Good job. So
yeah.
Last time, let me mention the book here, so the next generation will know. Preparing Young Christians for a Challenging World. It's on pre-order now. Available May. What's the day? May
1st.
May 1st. All right. So just a few weeks to go here. Thankfully, Endgame will come out first, and then I can... Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on the program today. God bless you, and we will be in touch.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Thanks, brother. All right, bye.
All right, well, that does it for our program today. I'm grateful for the continued support of our patrons and the partnerships that we have with our sponsors. And they are Defenders Media, Consult Kevin, The Sky Floor, Rethinking Hell, the Illinois Family Institute, Fox Restoration, and I am also pleased to announce that we're working on a relationship with Reasons to Believe that we will be solidifying in the next couple of weeks, so very pleased to have their support. I want to thank our guests today, J. Warner Wallace and Sean McDowell, and I want to encourage you again to check out their book here. We'll be sure to put a link at our website, and we've got it there in the live stream as well. And last but not least, I want to thank you for listening in and for striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
You've been listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. This is a listener-supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.